Hello! Thank you for joining me for this presentation. My name is Chaska McGowan, and I am a senior data science major at Bowling Green State University. This project was designed to fulfill both my data science capstone and interdisciplinary honors project requirements. Today, we will be talking about statistical analysis of land cover conversion in Northwest Ohio. In this presentation, I will explain the motivation for analyzing land cover conversion in Northwest Ohio. Then, I will explain why I chose to use the 2016 National Land Cover Database as the primary data source. Third, I will present the results of the analysis, and finally, I will provide some details about the methodology, the calculations, and the software used. This project was created in collaboration with the Executive Director of the Black Swamp Conservancy, Rob Crane. The Conservancy is a nonprofit land trust whose mission is to preserve agricultural and natural areas in Northwest Ohio for future generations. Historically, they've used legal agreements made with landowners to restrict future use of their land. And recently, they have a new program called the Food and Farm Initiative, which is like an entrepreneurial incubator for beginning sustainable farmers. The Black Swamp Conservancy was interested in better understanding land cover conversion trends in Northwest Ohio, especially the spatial distribution of land cover at the sub-county level, so that they can better prioritize their efforts. At this point, you may be asking, why do we even care about protecting natural and agricultural areas in Northwest Ohio? What you may not know is that a large portion of Northwest Ohio was formerly composed of the Great Black Swamp. The swamp was drained in the late 19th century and converted to agricultural land. The soil in the former swamp is particularly fertile, even in comparison to other regions of Ohio. Another reason that we care about land cover conversion trends in Northwest Ohio is because they have an impact on water quality in the region. As you may know, both agricultural runoff and impervious surface that indicates developed areas impact water quality. Both the preservation of fertile soil and water quality are compelling reasons to monitor and manage land cover conversion in Northwest Ohio. The project objectives are to investigate land cover conversion trends in the region, to look into the spatial distribution of those trends, especially on a sub-county level, and to look into the factors that drive land cover conversion in the region. The Black Swamp Conservancy Service area is indicated in the slide on the right side, and this will be the study area for the project. Now I would like to talk for a moment about why I chose the National Land Cover Database 2016 as the primary data source for this project. There are many publicly available land cover datasets that could have been used. In particular, the Conservancy was interested in the spatial distribution of land cover conversion at a sub-county level, so that left out most of the survey reports that are available, such as the Census of Agriculture. The two remaining options were either the National Land Cover Database 2016 or the Cropland Data Layer, and the National Land Cover Database, or the NLCD, has a few advantages for this project. First, the NLCD 2016 was designed specifically for year-to-year comparisons, whereas the Cropland Data Layer is not. While there are statistical techniques to mitigate errors when using the Cropland Data Layer for analyzing change over time, it's definitely preferable and easier to use something that was designed specifically for that purpose. Another reason that I decided to choose the NLCD 2016 is because I was interested in land cover conversion for all land cover types, not just crop categories. While the Cropland Data layer is designed to maximize the accuracy of the crop categories and depends on the National Land Cover Database for other classifications. The National Land Cover Database does not optimize any one category, and so it's a more well-rounded product for the purposes of this particular study. Future studies may find that the cropland data layer provides very useful information to learn more about different types of crop conversion in the region, but that is out of the scope for this project. So the conclusion is that the National Land Cover Database was chosen for this project because it has data that's valid at a sub-county level and because it was designed for comparison over time. When you live in the Midwest, it's easy to take fields upon fields of corn for granted, but cropland takes up a pretty small portion of the country as a whole, making up less than 16% of its area. The stacked area chart on the left side of the slide underscores the point that cropland is a limited resource that is not evenly distributed across the Midwest, but clusters in environmentally suitable areas like Northwest Ohio, and therefore we ought to monitor and manage it. The second point I would like to make is that the stacked area chart illustrates that most land cover persists from one year to the next. You can see that for each land cover type, we have almost horizontal lines going across the chart, even though years are on the x-axis. This tells us that land cover is a relatively stable characteristic of the landscape, and so it's hard to visually see what changes occurred and what their implications might be. That is part of our motivation for more quantitative analysis. The third point I would like to make about this slide is that knowing the proportion of the region that each land cover type makes up helps us understand what percent change or percent of region means. So when we talk about percent change of cropland, we need to remember that it starts out with a high base in comparison to a land cover type like hay and pasture, which constitutes a much smaller portion of the region and the U.S. If you think back to the project objectives, then you will remember that one of the questions was, what are land cover conversion trends in the region? In answering this question, we know it's relatively easy to calculate change in area of any given land cover type in Northwest Ohio, but the area change alone does not give us context for whether that change is large or small, or unusual or normal. So I decided to compare changes in Northwest Ohio with changes in the U.S. All the statistics I use about land cover change in the U.S. as a whole come from a paper titled Conterminous United States Land Cover Change Patterns 2001 to 2016 from the 2016 National Land Cover Database by Homer et al., published in 2020. Homer et al. Used similar techniques to us. However, they did not go in great detail in their paper about the exact methodology used, so these comparisons may not be perfectly accurate, but they give us a rule of thumb estimation for where Northwest Ohio falls in comparison to the U.S. as a whole. The bar graph on the right displays a so-called naive net change calculation calculated by subtracting the area of any given land cover type in 2016 from its corresponding area in 2001. Since we wanted to compare statistics between Northwest Ohio and the U.S., we then divided that net change in area by the total area of the respective region. I will summarize the results. We found that developed land gained approximately 95 kilometers squared. Said another way, 0.53% of Northwest Ohio was converted to developed land, while only 0.35% of the U.S. was converted to developed land. We can see this indicated in the bar graph by the red bars. Another key result was that in Northwest Ohio, we lost 46 kilometers squared of cropland, which constituted 0.26% of the region. In the U.S. as a whole, cropland gained 48,555 kilometers squared, which makes up 0.60% of the U.S. Gross change analysis in both the paper and that I did for Northwest Ohio revealed that in both cases, cropland conversion was mitigated by hay pasture converting into crops. So we can see this illustrated in the bar graph by the light green bars, which show that cropland decreased in Northwest Ohio while it increased in the U.S. We can also see that in both Northwest Ohio and the U.S., we lost hay and pasture. We can also notice that in Northwest Ohio, the light green and the dark green bars are about the same size. This tells us that about the same amount of area of Northwest Ohio was converted from crops and from hay pasture. The last thing I would like to note is that we can see that the U.S. had a significant increase in forest land. However, Northwest Ohio had a small decrease. Homer et al. Mentioned in their paper that most of the change in forest in the U.S. as a whole was due to trends in the national wood industry. Northwest Ohio has a very small amount of forest, and we do not have much of a wood industry, and so these trends are not relevant to us, and the comparison is not very useful. We want to take it one step further in answering the question, what are land cover conversion trends in the region? So what I decided to do to summarize some of our findings was to compare the percent change in developed land between Northwest Ohio, and the U.S. And the numbers from Ohio as a whole and the U.S. come from the paper that I mentioned on the previous slide. What we found is that Northwest Ohio is right on track with both state and national trends, with a 6.5% increase in development compared to 5.05% in Ohio and 6.7% in the U.S. So this tells us that we're not behind, but we're also not really ahead either. And the other thing that we should notice is that there was also a 9.54% decrease in hay pasture in Northwest Ohio during this time period. But remember that hay pasture makes up a pretty small portion of our study area, and so the larger percent change is really reflecting that it's coming from a smaller base. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there is more hay pasture being converted in terms of actual area as measured by kilometers squared. The next thing we want to investigate when answering the question, what are land cover conversion trends in the region, is what is the rate of change and is it changing over time? So we've got like an inception of change going on. And what you'll see is that the rate of change of development in Northwest Ohio and the U.S. is slowing down. And that is shown in the line graph on the left side of the slide, where the blue line shows you the rate of change of development in the U.S. and the red line shows you the rate of change of development in Northwest Ohio. And as you can see, the lines are going down over time, and that tells us that the pace of development is slowing, or at least it slowed between 2011 and 2016. So then when we look at the graph on the right hand side, which gives us the rate of change of other land cover types, we can do some comparative analysis. And something I have to mention is that the National Land Cover Database bases its developed class on an impervious surface product. And they only have the impervious surface product for 2001, 2006, 2011, and 2016, whereas for the other land cover classes, we have data for every year indicated in the chart on the right. And so that's one of the reasons that I split up these two graphs. So the thing that we want to see and notice is that in 2013 and 2016, the rate of change of cultivated crops on the previous year for which we have data was almost zero. And so that occurred at the same time period that the rate of development slowed. The other thing we want to notice is it also occurred at the same time that the rate of change in hay and pasture increased. We see a big dip in that orange graph on the far right side of our slide, and that shows a big increase in the rate of change of hay pasture in the negative direction. And so as we'll see when we do the spatial distribution analysis, and look more closely at our change conversion statistics, a lot of the change in cropland and hay pasture was cropland being converted to development, while hay and pasture was converted to cropland. And so that pattern is really reflected well in these graphs. And the last thing I want to say is that the rate of change of cultivated crops in forest is not changing a lot. So we're not seeing a dramatic shift. We also don't see that a lot of a change occurred during a specific time period. So what could have happened is we could see that almost all the change occurred in like 2006, for example, and we would see a big spike in our graph, but we do not see that. So it seems like most of the changes are pretty consistent over time, and we're not seeing some kind of trend associated with, for example, the 2008 recession or something like that. And so it seems maybe like a non-result to say that the trends were not associated with big historical events like that, but we may have expected that that would impact land cover conversion, and now we can see that it doesn't seem to have impacted it in this particular situation. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, one of the reasons that we're so interested in land cover conversion trends is because they impact water quality. Since wetlands help to filter water going into Lake Erie and also provide habitat for wildlife, among other things, the Conservancy and other people care about how the extent of wetlands in the region is changing. And so when we look at the wetland class from the National Land Cover Database, we see that there's a correlation between fluctuations in the wetland area and fluctuations in how far the water is stretching, or the extent of the water. And this is consistent with what Homer et al. Found in their study, and they actually found that there was a statistical association between the wetland area and the water area and precipitation. And so our theory is that we see this relationship where when the water goes up, the wetlands go down, and when the wetlands go up, the water goes down, mostly because of yearly fluctuations in precipitation. So now we get to jump into the second project objective, which was to investigate the spatial distribution of land cover conversion in the region. And this map shows that net change in area between 2001 and 2016 for 4 different land cover types was not evenly distributed. We see that land cover conversion was clustered in a few counties. So what you'll notice is that on the left upper side of the graph, we see a dark green color for Lucas and Wood County, and a slightly lighter green color for Hancock, Allen, and Erie County. And this indicates that these counties had the largest gains in development as measured by kilometers squared, or actual area. If you move your eyes to the right upper corner of the map, then we can see that the same counties had a corresponding decrease in cultivated crops, especially Lucas and Wood County. And so the point of this is really that the spatial distribution of land cover is really important, and it's not enough to look at the high-level statistics, especially for an organization like the Black Swamp Conservancy. If you look in the lower right-hand corner of the graph, you can see that hay pasture decreased in Williams and Hardin County the most, and that those counties saw a corresponding increase in cultivated crops. And so, as I mentioned before, this is a pattern that we've seen a lot, and we will see more of, that a lot of the change in cropland was mitigated by these increases in cultivated crops in Williams and Hardin County. And something I should note is one of the reasons we see these changes in Williams and Hardin County and not a lot of other places is because the region has such a small portion of hay pasture and it's really concentrated in just a few geographic areas, especially Williams and Hardin counties. So there's really no other hay pasture in the region which could be converted. We can go even deeper into examining the spatial distribution of land cover change and see where it occurred at a sub-county level. And this is really the benefit of using the National Land Cover Database for this project. So you can see that the conversion locations in Williams County appear distributed. We also can note that the gross changes in land cover indicated on the left side with the bullet points indicate that some of the hay pasture conversion to crops may be permanent because we have really different numbers of hay pasture and crops converting, and that indicates that this probably can't be explained exclusively by crop cycling. So here we have another map showing the pasture to crop conversion and the conversion to development areas within Hardin County. And the hope is that these maps will help the Conservancy drill deeper into the land cover conversion patterns that they're interested in. This map gives us another opportunity to investigate the spatial distribution of land cover conversion at a sub-county level. And what we see here is that we're focusing on forest to development and agriculture to development patterns, and that they are distributed mostly around Toledo, Ohio in the suburbs, as we might expect. And so the other thing we might mention is that very little conversion occurred in the southwest portion of Wood County. So hopefully this information will help the Conservancy understand the patterns of conversion in their service area. As you may remember, the final project objective was to investigate factors associated with land cover change. Land cover change is driven by many factors, including those related to demographic, economic, technological, institutional, and location factors, as well as farmer characteristics. Factors driving location may include soil properties, precipitation, population density, and slope or elevation. These factors are commonly used in land cover modeling because they are often readily available and do not rely on economic assumptions. I investigated location driving factors because they were commonly used in similar land cover conversion projects, but found that the relationship between the factors and land cover in Northwest Ohio was not very strong. As you can see in the parallel box plot on the right side of the slide, the distribution of values for each land cover type overlaps substantially. This makes the interstate access variable not particularly useful in modeling land cover conversion. And it's also not very informative because we can see from the maps already that most of the conversion is occurring around the cities and the urban areas, especially Toledo. And so what is needed for future work is not so much investigation of factors that drive location, but factors that drive conversion, especially economic factors. As I wrap up the presentation, I want to shift gears for a moment from discussing the results of the project to talk about the process and methodology. One of the things that were produced that you noticed were the land cover conversion maps that we used to analyze land cover conversion at a sub-county level. These were produced by generating a unique key that indicates each unique conversion type by using a pairing function, and then performing the pairing function on each map using raster algebra, and this basically layered the maps one on top of the other, and so that we could see which changes occurred at a very detailed level as well as when they occurred. And this was repeated for each time period that we have maps for. And so while the resulting map has thousands and thousands of categories because of the many different types of conversion that occurred during our time period, it can easily be simplified for visualization and analysis. For example, the map on the right side of the slide that indicates pixels that changed and pixels that did not change during this time period. Now, the map on the right side is very much using the raw data from the NLCD and likely overestimates the changes that occurred. However, it's a much more useful visualization, even as is, than the change index map provided with the National Land Cover Database 2016. The provided change index map assigns a change type for pixels that changed either from or to a land cover class, and if multiple changes occurred, then the higher ranked class is assigned. So by looking at the change index, it's not possible to know when a change occurred, nor is it possible to know from which classes it changed to or from. And that's the motivation for creating these change conversion maps. And there are many, many opportunities to expand on them, to not just produce change and no change maps or the conversion maps that we saw earlier in this presentation, but also to create maps showing the number of changes per cell, or perhaps changes, assigning a different color for changes that occurred in different years. And so perhaps change in certain years was clustered in a way that would be interesting to analyze. And so this really paves the way for future work to be done to better understand the spatial distribution of land cover conversion in the region. Finally, all of the work for this project was done with R statistical software. I started out using ArcGIS, and the project could have been completed with any standard GIS software such as ArcGIS, QGIS, or GRASS, but I was more familiar with R and interested in exploring its capabilities for working with geographical data. I used the raster and SF packages to read, process, and write spatial data, and I used the TMAP package for all the maps. I think it's worth noting that anything that you can read or write in an ArcGIS or other GIS software, you can read and write in R, and so there's good opportunities for interoperability between the two software types. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and found it very easy and very useful for this project. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope you have a great day.